time to talk about my second bike that I ever made. So, talking about the first bike, obviously, was just the frame. But this one should be a bit more exciting because the second bike is the one that I currently ride. So it's still built up and still changing some things and doing some experimenting with it. Oh, and for this video, you'll have to ignore this guy. I just got my mill in here, and this came with it. It's a Rotary Table. It weighs about 200 pounds, so I do not want to pick it up again right now. So it's just going to live here on the table for this video. So the first thing about the bike, I'm going to start it off the same as the last video, is the design. So my first frame, I kind of sort of drew it in AutoCAD, and then, still wasn't really sure. And, there's so many little dimensions and things you have to get right if you're drawing it all manually. For a really good example is just the front end of the bike. You have your fork, you have the axle to crown, but then you have your headset, cup, in this case an external cup. You have to account for that, then the head tube on the top, and there's just so many little things that are easy to miss. And so you just really have to take your time with it if you're going to go that route. I wholeheartedly, 100% will tell you that you need to get BikeCad, and I did as soon as I finished this bike. So I ended up using Fusion 360 for this bike, the free version. Again, I was trying to save a couple dollars. I mean, BikeCad costs, what is it? I think just shy of 400 bucks American. So it's absolutely worth it because it's meant for drawing bikes, and you just plug in the numbers you want. You get to see what changes, you get to play around with it. I mean, even if you're not building bikes, just playing around with it is such a great learning tool. They do have a free version you can do on the BikeCad website, and I'll put up a link for it to go check it out. But you really need to get BikeCad. Like, even if you look at the difference between my bike and then the next one that I made, which is my wife's bike, it's night and day difference. You can tell my bike had some compromises and things I didn't fully think through, but then her bike is much better. So get BikeCad for the design. Some of the numbers here. Elephant in the room, it is a 63.5 degree head angle, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's just too slack. I've actually got a video planned where I want to go into detail about head angle, bicycle steering, geometry, all that good stuff, because honestly it's just, well, here's the thing, it feels amazing pointed downhill, but for all of the riding that I do, we'd never, I don't have a lift access park, or I don't shuttle. So I'm pedaling uphill just as much as I'm pedaling downhill. So for the use case of this bike, 63.5 is just entirely too slack. So we got 63.5 degree head angle. Now, I do want to talk about, as far as the reach and the stack measurements, you've probably seen this in some of the initial pictures of the bike. This is based off of PVD's handlebar setup. And again, I want to do a whole video just about this, because this is, well, the way you can think about it, it's a one-piece bar and stem. But what it accomplishes is it lets you have this is basically a 20 mil stem on the handlebars. And again, I really need to dedicate an entire video talking about why this exists and what problems that it solves. So as far as like the handlebar reach and stack, the ones that actually matter, I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot right now, because currently on the bike I've been trying out different setups, kind of basically we'll call it a peer review of some stuff that goes around this, and trying to be honest with you, just trying to figure out my ideal reach and stack measurements. So the frame reach is 540 millimeters and the frame stack is 610 millimeters. So it's, I don't know, what would that be? Large, maybe XL, depending on what manufacturer you ask. Alright, so the seat tube angle the actual angle of the tube itself is 76.5 degrees. Now it's obviously an offset because it's bent, and so the effective seat tube angle with my saddle height works out to right around 80. That was one of the changes from the first bike, was I made it entirely too steep on the last one, and it just wasn't comfortable. I know it's trendy now to have steep seat tube angles, but it kind of is a preference thing. What seat tube angle you like and how steep your trails are climbing, and whether or not your bike is full suspension. That actually goes into it quite a bit because the designers have to make room for the rear tire to swing around, but that's a whole other topic. So the chainstay length on this bike is 410. Having a short chainstay on a bike and then having the short rear end and the long front end is what a lot of people refer to, or at least one part of what people refer to as forward geometry. It's where all the cool kids are going these days, and it makes the bike fun because having that short rear end keeps the bike really nimble and playful, and it keeps it from feeling too much like just a straight downhill sled, or like basically you can have a big bike but it feels like a smaller bike, if that makes any sense. Some more of the measurements here. The front center of this bike, which is the distance between the bottom bracket and the front axle, was, depending on how I measure it, because I've changed a few things since then, but basically it's right around like 870 to 880 millimeters, which is huge. That's partially because of the super ridiculous head angle, got the front end out that far. Then the bottom bracket height, that's one of the things I changed from the last bike. It's 310, which I use 175 mil cranks, and a 310 bottom bracket height to me feels good. I really like that for the trails that I ride. It's, you have to kind of get a good balance between pedal strikes everywhere and getting your center of gravity as low as possible. So, 310 is where I like to keep it. So the fork is 170 millimeter treble lyric right now, and it has the 46 millimeter offset. I'm going to verify that. Yes, 46 millimeter offset, and again it's a 27.5 tire. So what that means is that the trail distance on this bike, the mechanical trail, is 121 millimeters, and the flop height is 54 millimeters. And that's something that I want to talk about more again in a steering geometry video, because that's a big one there that really needs to be understood properly. Moving on to the part spec for this bike. So it's more or less the same as the first bike. I kind of just transferred all the parts over, and then I've slowly been upgrading since. So I already mentioned it's a Lyric. I bought that fork as an eBay special. I want to say it's 2017 with the, I think, Charger damper. I can't remember off the top of my head which damper it is, but I haven't played around with it too much. It just, it works, and I've been fixing other things first before I want to start messing with the fork. I started off with a bike yoke dropper. It was 185 millimeter, which I absolutely loved. The bike yoke droppers are amazing. Now, I swapped out to a 1-up 210, and I just took an inch off the top of the seat tube to do that, because I never really planned on doing that, but the issue I had was my wife's bike. I could realistically only fit a 185 for her, and I couldn't find any in stock when I bought it. So I bought myself the 210, gave her the bike yoke 185. And I'm still, I don't know, the 1-up dropper it works. It goes up and down just fine. It's been reliable. And after being used to the bike yoke, it just feels so cheap. And again, it's half the price, so can't really complain. The brakes that I have on it are the Shimano SLX. They're 4-piston brakes, front and rear, and I really love the way Shimano brakes feel. So the tires, I've pretty much been running the same tires since I built this bike. It's DHF on the front, DHR2 on the rear. Nothing too exciting, but they're really solid tires for a lot of the stuff around here. And one of the huge things massive things is cush core, front and rear, because I really wanted to try it out. And to give you the short version of my thoughts on cush core is it is not optional for me anymore, especially on the rear tire. Front tire, you know, maybe depending on what the bike is, but rear tire, you know, on a hardcore hardtail like this, it is absolutely without a doubt has to have cush core. It's like, it's just night and day difference. The pedals that I have right on there right now are just some Jesters. I'm actually trying them out. I've never had them before. You know, they're cheap and they work good. I like them so far. Some of the other stuff is kind of maybe not worth mentioning. You know, like the cranks, they're just race face that I've had. You know, I've ridden those cranks they were on my single speed bike that I showed you in the last video. I've been riding them for 10 years or so. You know, they just work, so I haven't had a reason to get new ones yet. And then one of the other super important things, honestly, I've spoiled myself with it and I don't want to go back to anything else, but the rear hub is an Onyx hub. And for those that don't know, the Onyx hub, instead of a system like most other bikes use a mechanical ratchet, you know, teeth that click in and out to give you the engagement. The Onyx hub is actually, some people call it a one-way bearing. It's a sprag clutch, but basically what that means is that you have infinite engagement. Like, there is no take up in the pedals. And one of the big things I really like is it's silent. Like, just completely silent when you're on the trail, which I honestly really love that. I know some people like the big loud buzzing, but you know, it kind of, you know, gets old after a while, so I really like the silent. It feels like stealth mode, and especially now with my full face helmet that I wear, it blocks the wind sound in my ears, and so it's just a wonderful experience to fly down the trail and the only thing that you hear is your tires on the dirt. I love it. So moving on from the part spec, I think I covered everything, or at least the most relevant things. So some of the screw ups and things that I want to change for the next version of this bike whenever I rebuild it for myself. So I already mentioned it is just too slack. There is, for the riding that I want to do, there's no reason to have a bike that slack. There's just so many problems that start to come around from that, and you know, the steering and everything else that goes into it. On that same topic, the bike's not long enough. So if you think about it, if I make the bike longer and also decrease the head angle, that means I can keep the front end where it's at. And because right now I've actually been running the bike with the 60mm stem. So if I design it properly this time around, once I figure out where I want my handlebars to be, I can go back to this bar and then I can make the bike, you know, there's 40mm right there that I can bring out the front end. So it's going to be a while before I rebuild this bike, because my next project is going to be quite a different bike, we'll say. So yeah, definitely need to make it longer. The internal routing that I did in the top tube, it was kind of fun. You know, I just wanted to try it out, see what happened. I put in stainless tubes all the way in front to rear, so you shove the cable in one side and it pops out the other end, no problem. But I'm not going to do that on any more of my own personal bikes, other than the dropper post, obviously. It's just not worth it in my opinion. It's cool, it looks kind of nice, but it's a pain. You know, like for example, the brake line. Yeah, if I want to take the brake off the bike, I have to pull the cable apart now. So again, I just want to try it out. Now another wonderful screw up, it goes back to my frame jig, is the rear wheel of this bike is not straight. If you can see it in the pictures if you notice the gap on one side of the chainstay yoke versus the other side. I've checked the dish of the wheel. The wheel's fine. It's just the frame itself is not perfectly straight. Now it's not something that you notice riding it. Like, it doesn't like go to one side of the trail or anything stupid like that. I've never noticed it, but it's something that obviously needs to be fixed. In fact, the Mark 1 bike up here behind me, it was even worse. It was so bad that I actually ended up purposefully dishing the wheel over to get it to look right. So that was kind of fun. Another silly, dumb mistake is the dent in the top tube of this bike. That is caused by not crashing, but the Park Tool PCS 10.2 bite mark. That's what it is. So again, just another stupid mistake of me, you know, being an idiot. The first bike I did a rattle can Rust-Oleum paint job. This one I powder coated, which I actually did myself. And powder coating is actually really simple. You know, if you've ever done any painting, you can powder coat. You know, it's once you practice a few tubes, check it out, learn the differences, it's no big deal. You know, you spray it on, and there's a ton of advantages to powder coating. I think one of my favorites is I'm a generally very impatient person. So when you powder coat a bike, you spray the powder on, you put it in the oven, cure it per the manufacturer's directions, you pull it out of the oven, and as soon as it cools down to ambient, it's done. It is 100% cured, as good as it's going to get. You know, it's not like paint where you have to wait multiple days in ideal conditions and then hope the paint hardened enough. Speaking of that, powder coating is extremely durable. You know, these frames, you know, mine and my wife's, it's amazing just how tough that stuff is. Like, even a good example, when I cut the seat tube a little bit shorter on this bike to fit the bigger dropper, you know, I pulled the seat tube collar off, and I was actually pretty surprised that you can't even see a scratch. You know, where the collar was super tight on the tube, even that held up perfect. Powder coating is absolutely the way to go. So another really awesome thing that happened with this bike is right after I finished it, posted up the pictures, there's a really popular Instagram page. I think they have something like 20,000 followers. I'm not going to say the name of it. I'll put it up here and then let you figure out the rest, because it has, you know, you'll see. But that Instagram page picked it up and then reposted it for me. And that was super awesome. You know, it got something like 2,000 likes and tons of people commenting. That was fun. You know, just being able to chat with everybody about it, and, you know, just putting your work out there and having a lot of people like it. It's very reassuring. That was nice. And also another cool thing is the build process itself was improving. You know, the first bike I mitered all the tubes by hand. On this bike, I ended up using my lathe actually to miter the tubes. And I'll see if I have any pictures of it, but basically all I did for the most part was I used the Paragon Machine Works tube blocks to hold the tube and phase it to where I wanted. I put a hole saw arbor in the chuck of the lathe, and then I just clamped the tube straight onto the quick change tool post. And that way I could turn the angle to whatever I wanted and, you know, set the offset kind of manually and get everything clamped in there nice and rigid, and then use the power feed on my lathe to run it through. And, you know, again, it's the same thing as the last bike of, you know, critiquing all the stuff that I screwed up and want to change, but it's still an awesome bike, and I love the way that it rides. It's currently my daily driver, we'll call it. I mean, right now the weather in this area is, you know, we're right in the middle to the middle end of the winter, so it's freeze, thaw, rain all the time, and, you know, the riding around here it's much better to stay at home. Don't want to screw up the trails too much. But yeah, it's the bike that I'm still riding. I'm still having a blast with it. I'm still experimenting, you know, with the handlebars and, you know, the stack and the reach and all that good stuff, getting it all sorted out. And as soon as that's done, I'll move on to building my next bike, which it's going to be a different bike, we'll say. It's going to be fun. So this bike will stick around for a long time, basically until I finish my next bike, and then I'll get around to rebuilding this one and making the changes and getting it tuned up better. And so the next video, I want to talk about my wife's bike that I made. but I may end up waiting for that one simply because I finished that bike right around New Year's, and it's been on a total of one ride since then. You know, it's currently February actually today's Valentine's Day when I'm recording this. But that bike, again, it's only been on one ride, so I really want to give her a chance to ride it more, check it out, get all of her thoughts, and then, you know, I'll make a video similar to this one and, well, you know, talk about all the stuff. But basically, the short version for now is it's kind of just it's a more refined version of the Mark II that's right here. You know, I brought the head angle back in more reasonable. I fitted it much more properly for her 29er. You know, it's kind of got all the changes that I wanted, but also a few geometry tweaks that we'll talk about later. So, I think that pretty much covers it for this video. Thanks for watching.